I don't know about you, but the judges that, at least the judges that I spent my 20s and 30s around, you ask them a question about a case like that, and if they would know. Did you ever talk about the Mueller investigation, the most important investigation going on in America? Judge with a lawyer in a law firm that represents the President of the United States. Every judge I've ever known would say this would be the answer. No, of course I wouldn't. What? Even the question is an insult to the integrity of most judges. And yet Brett Kavanaugh, and I'm not, I'm just stating what every lawyer knows. Brett Kavanaugh takes him 2 days to figure out whether he had an extraordinarily inappropriate conversation with somebody in the president's firm.
Lawyers are very, very careful about their contacts with judges and vice versa. Judges are extraordinarily circumspect, and they are equally careful in talking to lawyers. And in my questions to him yesterday, he acknowledged knowing only one lawyer at that firm, Ed McNally. But equally important, he was ambiguous and evasive and equivocal in stating whether he discussed the special counsel with anyone in the White House. And I asked him specifically about his potential conversations on the special counsel. He said, I never had an inappropriate conversation, but he wouldn't be more specific about what he has discussed on the special counsel. Likewise, he evaded questions about whether he'd pardon the president. He refused to say that he'd recuse himself, even though he's been nominated by a president who obviously is an unindicted co-conspirator. I asked him to say that he would not sit on issues involving the president's personal criminal or civil liability. He refused to say that he would take himself off those cases. And he refused to say that he would enforce a subpoena against the president, which is more and more timely in light of the president's increasing resistance to this investigation.
Senator, it's Willie Geist. So I know you have concerns about Judge Kavanaugh's views on presidential power, but this specific question here about whether or not he spoke to an attorney at the Kasowitz law firm about the Mueller probe could loom large depending on what happens with the Mueller investigation, what the outcome is, whether it comes before the Supreme Court in some shape or form. Do you think this is a question worth pursuing further? In other words, would you look to get documents from the Kasowitz firm and see if there was an email or a phone call that was made at some point?
We need those documents, if they exist, and we need to search for them to make sure that we find them. And they are probably among documents that have been withheld from us, if they do exist, and we need to pursue them. I am doing so through a Freedom of Information Act request that I've filed. We may need to go to a court to enforce it next week, and certainly it ought to be pursued. And you're absolutely right. The Mark Kasowitz firm is front and center in this investigation.
Senator, before we let you go, quickly want to ask you about what Rudy Giuliani has been saying over the last day or so with regards to the Mueller investigation, whether or not the president will submit to an interview, whether he'll do it through written questions, whether he'll allow a follow-up interview after the written questions. Do you believe, as you watch all this, that the president and Bob Mueller, in some shape or form, will sit down with one another or at least talk through the written word?
Rudy Giuliani has moved the goalposts repeatedly, saying what the conditions are, what the time and circumstances are and setting for any potential conversation. More and more, I'm of the view that there needs to be a subpoena that would have to be enforced. And that's why this nominee's views on presidential power and his doubling down on the idea that the president can refuse to enforce the law, nullify it in effect, deem it unconstitutional, even after it's upheld by the courts, and refuse to obey a subpoena are more and more alarming at a time when we face this impending constitutional crisis because of a president who is amoral and unmoored.
But you think Mueller will talk to the president at some point?
He has to talk to the president to credibly complete this investigation. There's no question about it.
All right, Senator Richard Blumenthal, as always, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Senator.
Ari, a lot of concern right now among Democrats in the Senate that Kavanaugh would vote against Robert Mueller being able to compel the president to testify. I've got to say, I find it hard to believe, though, that John Roberts, a man who believes his duty, his responsibility is to protect the institution of the Supreme Court, would yield so much power to the executive branch, and you wouldn't have John Roberts and perhaps one other Republican-appointed judge compel the president to testify under oath when a subpoena is delivered to him.
Well, Joe, I don't want to scandalize your knowledge of Washington, but I think the Mueller part of these hearings, and I was down there for a couple of days, has a lot more of the politics than the law. The Roe v. Wade conversation has a lot more of the law than politics, in that what this hearing has unearthed is that you have someone who was giving private, very pro-life advice to a pro-life administration, which underscores that he might be a pro-life judge, and people can decide whether that's good or bad. That's why we have a democracy in vetting. On the Mueller part, there is far less evidence that he would be radical in that way. Because there just isn't much evidence at all. There's a law review article that's fascinating. There's evidence of, I think, of some partisanship. Shocking that a political judge who was appointed by the Trump administration has some partisanship. But to your point, we just don't know. And I think we have to be fair about that. And then you look at the balance on the court. I think that if you had a Clinton-like situation that went with a grand jury subpoena to the court, it would be a big case, but I think there's a lot of reasons why the court might want to rule, backing up U.S. v. Nixon, that no president's above the law.
I find it hard to believe they would not.
Right. What Kavanaugh will act upon, of course, we don't know, but certainly I can tell you that the Trump team, the Giuliani camp, believes they're very confident in this. They have said repeatedly, and again, it's another effort to sort of perhaps even taunt Mueller. They're looking for that subpoena. That's a fight that Giuliani has told me that they would welcome, that they believe that they would win on legal merits, and that predated the Kavanaugh pick, and certainly they've only grown more confident since.
Well, despite the fact, though, David Ignatius said it was Rudy Giuliani himself who said during the Clinton impeachment that no man is above the law, and if you were subpoenaed, you have to answer that subpoena and testify.
You know, the way in which Giuliani has played this, almost defying the Mueller and the courts, I think it has to offend Chief Justice Roberts. Everything we know about him shows that he takes the court and the court's role seriously. I must say, in all the Kavanaugh hearings, the thing that's bothered me most was his refusal to criticize Donald Trump's remarks, in particular about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where he said in a tweet a couple years ago, "Our mind is shot." We remember that Neil Gorsuch, during his confirmation hearings, very specifically said he thought Trump's comments about the judiciary were disheartening.
Yes, he did.
Yep.
Couldn't have been more specific,
Well, we
and
pointed
that's
this out
what
last
Kavanaugh
Yes, he did.
has not done, and that bugs me.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like watching Paul Ryan or some of the Republicans on Capitol Hill, where they're pretending that something isn't happening. When you get a question, Susan, that is so obviously connected to today's events, and can the president pardon himself? Obviously, Kavanaugh knows what he's being asked about.
Of course.
And it's frustrating to watch him dodge, and I worry about a loyalty oath. I mean, I can't imagine, but I wonder. I will say, in the age of Trump, you can't actually put anything out of your mind.
And I certainly think there's merit to that, but I also think when we look at this hearing, it really seemed like it was certain senators looking for their Spartacus moment.
Yeah.
It was politicized. There were senators who wouldn't meet with Kavanaugh. And I certainly can understand why they have problems with him, but that at the same time, this just seemed like a political exercise more than ever before, even more than Neil Gorsuch.
It was a political circus, and I do want to follow up on something that David said, where he said couldn't believe that John Roberts wouldn't be offended by what Donald Trump has said over the past year and a half about so-called judges and questioning the authority of federal judges. I've talked to federal judges. I've talked to family members of federal judges who have said conservative federal judges, Federalist Society type federal judges have been deeply offended by Donald Trump's attacks on the independence of the judiciary. I'll say it again today. Rudy Giuliani does not want to challenge the Supreme Court on this subpoena because he will lose. And I don't think it'll be close.
Yeah. Ari Melber, thank you. We'll see you
Thank
on
you,
the
Ari.
you.
6 p.m.
It's great to
Eastern
see you.
on
Happy to be back in New York.
MSNBC.
Yeah.
All right, still ahead, the midterm races are all locked up in several states that President Trump won by double digits in the 2016 election. We'll dig into the new numbers next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.